In the sealed archives of Harrisburg, behind a locked door marked "Restricted" by order of the state, lies a file so unsettling that even the clerks who handle its transfer avoid eye contact. The folder is stamped 7 times with a black wax seal, each bearing the same crest, a downward-pointing sword through a crowned skull. Inside, the truth waits, not the folklore passed around drunkenly at taverns, not the softened version published in Pennsylvania Folklore Quarterly. No, this is the original sin, the blood contract, the one that cursed the Murphy name for generations and took every one of their sons at the age of 28. They say it was an accident, 7 accidents in fact, spread across nearly 5 decades, but even lies require effort, and this one was preserved too cleanly, too carefully. What if I told you it wasn't fate, not coincidence, but payment? What if each death was not just expected, but scheduled? You're not here by mistake. There are patterns hiding in the fabric of American history, loops of power, legacy, and sacrifice that repeat beneath the surface. Every war, every family name that disappears without explanation, every institution that rises and never falls, no matter the corruption beneath it. You think this is about a single family? It isn't. It's about the price that gets paid for power, and who pays it. In the town of Millfield, Pennsylvania, where even the fog feels watched, there stands a church that hasn't opened its doors in 80 years. In its basement is a sealed ledger with only one sentence scribbled on its final page. Murphy, final installment due October 12, 1904. Every Murphy son died at 28, not 27, not 29, and each one died in a way that defied both science and witness logic. One fell from a church bell tower, one drowned in a dry quarry, one bled out, but had no wounds. The deeper you go into this set, Ori, the more it feels like you're not reading it. It's reading you, watching how much you're willing to know. So if you're ready to stop believing the history they taught you, stay with me, but don't say you weren't warned. The first recorded death was cataloged as misadventure. That's how they wrote it in the coroner's log. Misadventure, a tidy word, useful, sterile. It erases pain, deletes suspicion, smooths the jagged edge of tragedy into something manageable. But there was nothing manageable about the death of son Declan Murphy, the first son of the first son, Seamus's grandson, whose life ended just hours after his 28th birthday, under circumstances so strange that the town priest refused to preside over his funeral. Declan had been healthy, strong, the type of man other men turn to during crisis. His birth was hailed as the dawn of a new chapter for the Murphy family, a break in the shadow that had followed them since Patrick's mysterious death in the mines. By the age of 27, he was married, respected, and had just been promoted to foreman of the new Keystone Blast Furnace project, the same project that was, unofficially, said to have doubled the company's wartime contracts. On October 11, 1904, Declan celebrated his birthday quietly, dinner with his wife, a visit to his parents, and then a late-night walk through the cemetery where his grandfather, uncles, and cousins now rested. His wife, Eleanor, would later say she woke to find the house cold, the front door ajar, Declan gone. They found him at dawn, seated upright on the cemetery bench beneath the family oak, his eyes wide open, no sign of trauma, no struggle, just an expression, something between awe and terror frozen across his face. In his left hand, a matchbook from McBride's Tavern. In his right, a small, rolled scrap of vellum that had not aged. It read, 7 sons for 7 debts, bound in blood, paid in silence. The local doctor, not Caldwell, who had passed a decade prior, wrote cardiac arrest, another neat phrase, another layer of denial, but this time it was different, because Eleanor, Declan's wife did something the others hadn't. She went to the state police. She showed them the note. She gave them names, dates, testimonies from the other widows in the Murphy bloodline. For a brief moment, it looked like the silence might be broken, until the night Eleanor vanished from her locked room in the Harrisburg Asylum, where she'd been committed the day after her testimony was recorded. Her last words to the nurse? "They don't kill for vengeance, they kill for balance." And the file was sealed. There's a reason the Murphy name doesn't appear on the town's founding plaque, even though Seamus was instrumental in building Millfield's infrastructure, in laying the very stones its church was built on. The town erased them, not out of hatred, but fear. Fear of proximity to a bloodline so deeply entangled with something ancient that even saying their name too often was rumored to draw the hourglass closer. After Declan's death, whispers returned like rot beneath the floorboards. It wasn't just the Murphy boys dying at 28. It was the way they died. Always publicly, always precisely timed. Local legend said the deaths didn't just occur on their birthdays. They occurred at the hour of their birth. That's how precise the pattern became. In 1922, the fourth son, Callum Murphy, was found dead inside the old Keystone Administrative Building. He'd gone in late to retrieve records, or so he told his supervisor. What he retrieved, however, was something far older than documents. The building, already shuttered by the company since 1918, had become something of a mausoleum, its records archived in Harrisburg, its blueprints lost. But when Callum entered, the town's night watchman saw every light inside flicker on, simultaneously, and just as suddenly, go dark. When they found Callum's body the next morning, he was curled in the fetal position in front of the company vault. His face had aged 40 years overnight. His fingertips were black, but again, no wounds, no cause. Except this time, they found something else. Etched into the floor, beneath the dust, was a sigil. Not drawn in ink or carved by hand, but seared into the wood as if by heat. A triangle within a circle, pierced by a vertical line. Locals would later recognize it as a variation of the ancient seal of Saturn, the Roman god of time and sacrifice. No autopsy was performed. The famille, Lee, was pressured into a closed casket funeral, and the building burned down 2 nights later in what officials called a lightning accident. But there was no storm. There never is. By now the pattern was undeniable. 7 sons, 7 deaths, each tied not just by blood, but by some other contract, one older than the country itself. You see, in America we like to believe we're free, but freedom is often the illusion granted to those too distant from power to see its cost. In 1930, the Murphy family stopped speaking to outsiders. Their house became a fortress of silence, curtains drawn day and night, windows covered in thick, black oilcloth. The family no longer attended church, no longer walked to the market, and their youngest son, Finian Murphy, once the town's most promising student, was pulled from school just months before graduation. The excuse? Health concerns. But those who had seen Finn in town said he looked perfectly well. Too well. Almost frozen in time. His 28th birthday approached like a funeral bell no one could silence, and with it, the town's anxiety bloomed. Farmers claimed their livestock stopped breeding. Children said they heard whispers from the Murphy house. Not voices, but something lower, mechanical, calculating. The air itself felt thinner that summer, as if the valley were preparing to witness a toll it no longer had the strength to pay. Finn was different. Unlike his brothers and cousins, he knew what was coming, and he wasn't going to run from it. In the final weeks leading to his birthday, he began writing, not letters, Not a diary, something else. A manual. A 43-page document now known among underground researchers as the Pattern Ledger. Pages appeared in estate sales decades later, auctioned off to collectors of occult Americana. What remains paints a picture of a young man trying to outwit destiny. The ledger detailed not just his family tree, but correspondences between the Murphy men and key figures in Keystone's hierarchy: Josiah Bentley, Dr. Caldwell, even a man listed only as MC, the Keeper. It described a deal, not in metaphor but in accounting terms. A debt owed to an entity called the Scales, a force that didn't forgive, didn't forget, it only balanced. On September 9th, 1930, Finn did not die. Not at first. He went missing. Witnesses claimed they saw him lurking into the fog behind the Murphy homestead around midnight, holding a lantern and muttering a phrase over and over. I offer the sum in silence. Let the line be broken. 3 days later, search parties found the lantern at the edge of the abandoned quarry, but no body. 3 months later, Margaret Murphy, now the last surviving matriarch, received a package. Inside was a single page from Finn's ledger. On it, scrawled in blood, the prices paused, but never forgotten. After Finn vanished, the Murphy estate went into a deeper kind of lockdown, something beyond isolation. The windows were boarded from the inside. A ring of iron stakes was driven into the soil around the property, each inscribed with glyphs no one in Keystone recognized. Some said they resembled old Irish Ogham, others claimed they were closer to early Masonic encryption, but no one dared to step closer. The house looked less like a home and more like a prison built to keep something in. Then came the fireflies. Hundreds of them, glowing white, not yellow, began circling the Murphy house each night after sunset. Their lights didn't flicker naturally. They pulsed in unison, as if directed by a rhythm no one else could hear. It was Finn's 29th birthday, the birthday he was never supposed to reach, when they stopped circling and began swarming the town square. That same night, dogs wailed, power lines snapped, and 7 people went missing in a single hour, including the sheriff, who once threatened to arrest Margaret Murphy for refusing to cooperate in the search for her son. All that remained was his badge, twisted in half, resting on the Murphys' front steps. But then, something more terrifying occurred. One of Finn's pages, assumed lost, was anonymously delivered to the local paper, tucked into an envelope that smelled of charred wood and salt water. It contained a bonk map, not just of Keystone, but of points beyond, marked with strange runes and dates. Most of the dates were crossed out, but one remained untouched. August 3rd, 2025. Today's date. That map included your town, and a symbol identical to the one carved into the back of the Murphy family's front door was printed in red over your neighborhood. Coincidence? Some say yes. Others say, you were always meant to find this story. Back in 1931, Margaret Murphy's final act was to wall herself inside the cellar, leaving a single sentence etched into the stone with a rusty nail. We tried to change the sum, but the sum changes us. The house was later sold to the state, but no records exist of demolition or redevelopment. Locals say the structure still stands, untouched, hidden under a false plot number, buried in legal silence. And at 11:11 each night, people swear they see a lantern glowing in the fog. The Murphy family line should have ended with Margaret. At least, that's what the town believed. No records of children, no known heirs. But in 1963, 32 years after Margaret bricked herself into her cellar tomb, a maintenance worker repairing a sewer line behind the old Murphy plot uncovered a sealed iron box. Inside, birth certificates. Not one, 3. All bore the surname Murphy. Each was dated 28 years apart. The implications were staggering. It wasn't just that the sons died at 28. It was that new ones kept appearing. Hidden, filed into obscurity. Their names weren't Finn or Malcolm or Daniel. The names had changed, but the signature at the bottom of each certificate was always the same. Mother, Margaret E. Murphy. In her handwriting, medical examiners later confirmed the paper, the ink, even the fingerprints, all matched her 1931 profile. Somehow, impossibly, the woman who had died in a sealed stone chamber was still signing official state documents decades after she was buried. That's when whispers of the recursion began. The Murphy curse, as townsfolk once called it, had matured into something far more organized. A loop, an equation, perhaps. One that replaced each fallen son with a new vessel, always born in secrecy, always raised apart, and always, no matter where they began, returning to Keystone by their 28th year. They never came by choice. Each new Murphy reported the same compulsion, dreams of a black farmhouse, a woman's voice humming an Irish lullaby, and a feeling that time was folding in on itself. One described it as being watched not from the sky, but from behind a mirror that remembers your sins. By 1991, conspiracy theorists and occult researchers descended on Keystone. None lasted long. One man, who claimed he had broken the recursion, vanished mid-sentence during a live radio broadcast. The recording exists. His voice cuts off at the exact moment the studio clock struck 11:11 p.m. Today, the town of Keystone appears on no updated maps. It's listed as a ghost town, despite reports of lights, of music, of voices behind boarded windows. But no one who's gone looking returns. Because the recursion isn't a curse. It's a contract, one written in blood, signed by a mother who refused to let time bury her grief. And the next renewal is due in 28 days. They called her the widow in the attic. Not Margaret Murphy, not anymore. After her death, and after the rumors of the recursion spread through the fringe circles of occult academia, she became something else. A myth wrapped in mourning clothes. Her story evolved into something more sinister than a grieving mother. She became a keeper of time, a binder of contracts, a woman who had outwitted death itself. In 1996, a classified psychological profile authored by Dr. Gerald Huxley, a behavioral specialist once affiliated with the now-dissolved Psychogenic Studies Division, surfaced in fragments across encrypted forums. According to the document, Margaret's obsession with her sons wasn't rooted merely in maternal loss. It was devotional, ritualistic, as if the sons weren't simply born of her, but built for something else. Huxley described a pattern found in the journals Margaret left behind: elaborate numerologies, Irish burial rites mixed with Eastern resurrection chants, and repeated references to the clockmaker's debt. That phrase appears 42 times in a single volume, each instance followed by a crude symbol, a triangle bisected by a chain. Researchers traced that symbol to a banned monastic group from 14th century Galicia known as La Orden del Reloj, the Order of the Clock. Their belief? That time was a sentient force wounded at the fall of man, and that chosen families could stitch it back together through blood. The Murphys, it seemed, had been one of these families, or perhaps the last one. One entry in Margaret's journal reads, "I was chosen when I bled on the 7th gate. My womb became a metronome. Each sun, a beat, each death, a tolling bell. I carry the rhythm of eternity until the clock is healed. It was no longer about death. It was about our timing. Every 28 years, the same soul reborn, a fragment of the whole, a ticking part of some terrible metaphysical machine. But here's the horror that Huxley uncovered, and which drove him to suicide weeks after completing his report. These sons, they were never meant to live full lives. They were meant to be reset buttons, instruments to rewind something mankind was never meant to unspool. Which begs the question, if the Murphy sons were engineered to die, what happens if one survives? The answer came in 2002. His name was Nathaniel Murphy, the sixth son born under a blood moon in a thunderstorm that knocked out power across 3 counties. Locals called it an omen, but the family doctor, a man who would later disappear without a trace, swore the child came out not crying, but smiling. Nathaniel was different. He didn't crawl until he was 2, didn't speak until 5, but by 7, he had begun to draw things, intricate spirals, symmetrical geometries, things no child should understand. One teacher kept one of his drawings, an eerily accurate diagram of an orrery, a mechanical model of the solar system, etched in charcoal with a precision that suggested divine possession or inherited madness. At 13, Nathaniel stopped sleeping, not occasionally, completely. Doctors were baffled. His heart rate remained steady. His cognition never declined. He claimed he didn't dream, didn't need rest, because he was already inside the dream. Then came his 28th birthday. But this time, he did not die. There was no aneurysm, no vanishing, no crash. Instead, Nathaniel vanished, voluntarily, leaving behind a sealed envelope addressed to a local historian named Agnes Pelham, who'd been researching the Murphy legacy for over a decade. Inside the envelope, a single phrase typed on aged vellum. The clockmaker weeps. The pendulum is broken. I am the 13th chime. Pelham, already obsessed with the idea that the Murphys were part of some time cult, panicked. She tried contacting old members of the Order of the Clock, but their monastery in Galicia had burned down in 1978 under mysterious circumstances. Every record, every relic, destroyed. Or so she thought. In the weeks that followed Nathaniel's disappearance, Pelham began to receive packages, each from different cities. Inside, fragments of ancient clockpot, artis, pages from Margaret's hidden journals, and blood-stained sheets of music. Each was labeled with a date and a city, and all were future dates. The implication? Nathaniel had transcended, not just escaped death, but escaped a chronology. He had become a living rupture in time's flow, not a man, but a variable. And when Pelham finally found a recording left behind in his old room, what she heard chilled her soul. I am not supposed to exist, but now that I do, the cycle has snapped. Time bleeds in reverse, and something ancient has noticed. What happens when the sacrifice survives? You break the rhythm. And what breaks the rhythm? Summons the conductor. For centuries, the Murphy family believed they were cursed, but the truth may be far worse. They were chosen. After Nathaniel's disappearance, the federal government intervened. Agents posing as members of a historical preservation society sealed off the Murphy estate. Local archives were raided. Pelham vanished without warning. Her research? Confiscated. But not before one final email escaped her server, a scrambled document titled Murphy Equation. No scientist could make sense of it. Mathematicians called it nonsense. But occultists, those versed in Hermetic math and chronotheology, saw something else. A ritual disguised as an algorithm. What if the Murphy sons weren't victims? What if they were variables in a cosmic experiment? Margaret Murphy's journals hinted at something ancient buried in their bloodline, something pre-Christian, pre-human. She wrote of the pulse, a metaphysical rhythm that pulsed through her sons, peaking every 28 years. That number wasn't arbitrary. It corresponds with the lunar node cycle, the period when eclipses repeat, a time believed by ancient Sumerians to thin the veil between worlds. In other words, the Murphy sons weren't dying randomly. They were being offered. Every 28 years, a gateway opened, and one of them was the key. Until Nathaniel survived. His survival wasn't salvation, it was detonation, a cosmic lockpick in a door meant to stay sealed. And the thing that door kept hidden? It's waking up. Residents near the Murphy house have reported tremors, electromagnetic disturbances, and missing time. Entire hours they cannot account for. Clocks spin backward. Livestock are born with twisted spines and blind, milky eyes. One child wandered into the woods behind the property and returned mute, with ancient runes carved into her palms. She could not write, but she drew. Over an ara, Verithur spiral. The same one Nathaniel etched as a child. Authorities blamed it on local folklore and mass hysteria, but they underestimated the power of pattern. Nathaniel didn't escape death. He reversed it. He unshackled the timeline, and with every passing day, the town of Wexley moves closer to a moment it cannot unlive, a convergence point the journals called the hour of the 13th chime. It's not midnight, it's after, and after is where monsters hide. The phrase echoed through Margaret Murphy's final diary. The hour of the 13th chime. But what chime? What hour? In August of 1952, a Catholic missionary stationed in southern Peru wrote to the Vatican about a heretical timekeeping ritual he'd witnessed in the Andes. It involved a 13th toll rung only once every generation, not to mark time, but to distort it. His notes, obscure and nearly burned, referenced a symbolic exchange. The life of a blood-marked heir in return for a single favor from the hidden realm. That document never saw public light, but parts of it remarkably match Margaret's private writings. In both, the name appears, Kadareth, not a demon, not a god, something older than both. The Murphys weren't just haunted by bad luck. They were caretakers of a clock buried beneath reality, each son a ticking component in a machinery of metaphysical rupture. And the final chime, the 13th, wasn't meant to kill Nathaniel. It was meant to waken him, because the 13th chime does not toll from a bell. It resonates from the soul of the survivor. Nathaniel was never meant to live beyond 28, but by surviving, he became the missing link, the untuned note in an ancient song. Since then, recordings near Wexley show audio anomalies. Every 72 hours, a deep frequency hum, barely audible to human ears, pulsing beneath the earth like a buried heart. One sound engineer, curious, ran it through frequency mapping software. The result? A human voice, whispering in ancient Greek. Let the gate be broken, for the lamb has fled the knife. Locals have started behaving oddly, walking backwards, speaking in dead dialects they've never learned. A man in a coma for 19 years woke up at 3:13 a.m. screaming Nathaniel's name in a voice, not his own. He repeated one phrase until death. The blood must finish the song. Margaret wrote it too, because the Murphys were never victims of fate. They were its instruments. And now that the melody is unfinished, something is coming to complete it. Nathaniel Murphy's journals, confiscated by local police in 1963 after his mysterious disappearance, were never returned to the family, but in 1997, a photocopy surfaced at a black market antiquities auction in Berlin. The first page contained only one sentence, scrawled hastily, in blood or red ink. "I have seen my death, and it was not mine." Nathaniel had been unraveling. Each day after his 28th birthday, he documented visions, clocks that ticked backwards, mirrors that showed not his reflection but his brother's. Each one bleeding from the mouth, their eyes filled with sorrow or rage. But it was the night of March 3rd, 1963, when he wrote of the latchless door. He claimed it appeared in the woods behind the Murphy property, a freestanding black door, weathered and ancient, suspended upright without hinges, frame, or foundation. He heard whispering from behind it, his father's voice, but his father had been dead for over a decade. That night, Nathaniel stopped writing. What happened next is stitched together from three sources: a neighbor's testimony, local police dispatch logs, and the journal of a young theology student from Ohio visiting the region. They all mention a sound. At 3:13 a.m., the same hour as the coma patient, and the ancient chant, a vibration shook the region. People described it as a howl without breath. Like stone screaming, all lights in Wexley dimmed, dogs howled, birds fell dead from the sky. Nathaniel was never seen again. But what the police did find was stranger. In his study, there was a single shoe filled with ashes, and on the floor, etched in deep gouges, were the words, "I opened it. The 13th chime is not an end. It's an invitation." Some believe Nathaniel escaped through the door. Others think he was taken. What's certain is this: after that night, the land where the Murphy house once stood would not grow crops. Cows miscarried. Children spoke of a tall man with no mouth standing in the trees. And in 1971, a new family who attempted to build on the property vanished within 6 months, their bodies never found. There are places where time frays, where blood is a key, where names are more than names. They're triggers, and Nathaniel Murphy may have been the final syllable of something ancient awakening. After Nathaniel vanished, the Murphy family line should have ended, but it didn't. In 1974, a woman named Clara Ames, claiming distant kinship to the Murphys, surfaced in Pennsylvania. She produced a birth certificate with the Murphy name and spoke at length about the family burden on national radio, a strange and chilling interview that aired once before the station claimed technical malfunction and pulled it from archives. But independent researchers later tracked Clara to a psychiatric facility in upstate New York. Her file was sealed, labeled not as a patient, but as property of Department M. What little leaked out described her repeating only one phrase in Latin, mortuus in aeternum viget. The dead eternally stir. Staff reported Clara would scratch this into the walls, her skin, or her food trays. But the most disturbing part? She died at 28 years old. The autopsy revealed no physical cause. Her organs were pristine, but her brainstem had collapsed inward, as if something had pulled it from inside. The pathologist wrote, "It's as if her mind was turned off from another place." Years later, in 1986, a storm unearthed something buried behind the original Murphy house foundation, a vault, covered in iron etchings and surrounded by 13 cedar trees planted in a perfect circle. Inside were 13 coffins. 12 were occupied, each with a Murphy male, perfectly preserved, all appearing no older than 28. The 13th coffin was empty. DNA tests confirmed their identities, But here's the horror. Each one had already been buried elsewhere, documented, mourned, and interred. So who were these perfect replicas, and why were they arranged in a clock formation with Roman numerals carved above each? One theory began to circulate among occult historians that the Murphy family wasn't just curtain. Said they were gatekeepers, chosen or trapped in some ancient pact to guard what lies beneath the 13th coffin, a temporal tether, some called it, a sacrifice to ensure something stayed asleep. But what happens when the cycle completes? What happens when there is no next son to die at 28? And why did Clara, before dying, whisper the final words of the interview? "I am not the end. I am the echo. The door remembers." When news of the vault spread, it didn't hit the mainstream press. It was quietly suppressed. Every publication that tried to investigate was bought out, silenced, or burned in mysterious office fires. But in private circles, among scholars of the arcane, abandoned theology students, and deep state defectors, the discovery sparked panic. There was a name whispered in grim, ancient circles: the 13th host. According to pages torn from a 12th century Cistercian manuscript held at an off-record Vatican archive, this host was a bloodline tether. Each generation produced a vessel, male, and always claimed at 28, to suppress something ancient, beneath our perception. The manuscript referred to it only as dolor inversus, inverted sorrow, not a being, not a god, but had a collapse of meaning. A consuming entropy birthed not from hell, but from man's own defiance. And if the host ever failed, if no male heir was claimed, the pact would break, and hasta the inversion would spread. In 1990, after the discovery of the vault, the Murphy house, already decaying, mysteriously caught fire and collapsed. But before it burned, a local boy broke in, drawn by dares and neighborhood legend. He never made it out. Firefighters found his body in the basement, but he wasn't burned. He was perfectly intact, sitting in a rocking chair, and like the others, he was 28 years old. Problem is, the boy was only 15. His ID, school records, and dental x-rays matched, but his body, his face, unmistakably that of a man near 30, and carved into his chest, not with a knife, but with seared flesh, were the words: "The clock resists stillness." The local sheriff's report was sealed, and the family disappeared within the year. No trace, no forwarding address. Their home sold to a shell company. Since then, rumors say the land has been bought and sold over a dozen times, every owner vanishing or dying by age 28. Whatever the Murphys bound with blood and ritual, something is beginning to stir, and the 13th coffin still empty. In the winter of 1999, a private investigator named Ellis Wren took interest in the Murphy case, not out of obsession but necessity. His own son Daniel had vanished after receiving a research grant to study genealogical anomalies in rural Kentucky. His last known communication, a single sentence in a voicemail: "Dad, they knew he turned 28. Wren traced Daniel's path to Clay County, to the overgrown property where the Murphy home once stood. The foundation had sunk, the well was sealed, and a crude fence of rusted iron had been erected. But inside the center of the ruin, surrounded by scorched brick and briar, stood an unmarked gravestone. No name, no date, only a single phrase deeply etched: "One host failed, another must rise." Wren's investigation uncovered town records that should not have existed, birth registries for boys that had never been born, Death certificates pre-signed by county coroners, a pattern emerged. Male infants listed as stillborn, only to appear again in secret baptism logs maintained by a now defunct church branch. He tracked the names and found photographs, young men with hollow eyes, each vanishing without public notice before their 30th birthday, every face eerily similar, not just similar to each other, but to Daniel himself. It was as if the bloodline was not merely passed, it was copied, replicated, reset. In a forgotten wing of the state archive, Wren found a journal by a Union Army chaplain dated 1865. It described a village encounter near the Murphy land where townsfolk were seen conducting midnight rituals in silence, surrounding a weeping man chained to a stone altar. The chaplain claimed the ritual was designed to pause death and bind grief. He called them the Mournrites, caretakers of a sorrow that could never be healed, only managed through sacrifice, and they always sacrificed their own. Wren never published his findings. On January 3, 2000, he mailed a locked case to his brother in Maine, marked, "Open if I vanish." He then returned to Clay County. Witnesses say he stood at the ruins for over 7 hours. He was never seen again. The case never arrived in Maine. It was intercepted, its contents classified by Homeland Security. Why? Because someone, or something, with deep reach is still maintaining the pattern, still protecting the 13th coffin. Clay County's remaining elders whisper about at the 13th coffin, but never above a breath. They say it wasn't meant to be buried, it was meant to be guarded, and the Murphy line was chosen, not cursed, entrusted. The tragedy wasn't a flaw of fate, it was a pact, sealed long before any of them were born. In 1804, before Kentucky was a state, there was a documented land exchange between 3 Irish families recently arrived from Ulster, the Donnellys, the Brogans, and the Murphys. What they didn't know, or what they refused to admit, was that the land wasn't empty. It had been consecrated by an indigenous group who never recorded their rituals in writing. Early maps mark the region with strange notations: Valley of Holding, Land of Echo Sons, the mouth that demands the same face. The local tribes avoided it, but the Murphy line settled directly in its heart. That's when the deaths began. One son, every generation, dead at 28. No signs of trauma, no pattern in profession, health, or lifestyle, just extinction on schedule. But here's where the horror deepens. In the family's own journals, some of the fathers knew what was coming. They left cryptic warnings for their wives, often in languages they didn't speak: Gaelic, Latin, even phonetic renderings of Cherokee words. They didn't try to escape, they prepared. Some even constructed elaborate and underground vaults, not to escape the fate, but to ensure that only one son would ever be born each generation. They were trying to contain something, concentrate it. And the 13th coffin? It wasn't built in case of death. It was built as a seal, not for a body, but for a soul. Or perhaps something worse, a force, a fragment of ancient mourning that attached itself to a bloodline, using it like a circuit. There's a theory among private folklorists that the Murphy sons weren't just dying, they were being recycled, each born again with the same template, carrying the same grief, aging into the same knowledge, and finally reaching the same end. That would mean every Murphy son was not different. They were the same one, again, and again, and again, until the 13th. The 13th son was born in silence. His mother, Catherine Murphy, delivered him alone in a boarded-up farmhouse where mirrors had been broken and every clock set to midnight. She didn't scream. She didn't pray. She simply rocked in place and whispered the same word over and over. Not again. Not again. The child, Callum, came out with eyes wide open, not newborn blue, but a color that defied naming, like something had looked through the womb into this world and decided to keep watching. He didn't cry for 3 days. When he finally did, the sound cracked a window. The dog that lived on the property ran into the woods and never returned. Catherine knew this wasn't just another Murphy's son. He was the final one. The others had been drawn towards some invisible magnet. They wandered, hunted, explored, or enlisted. All met their deaths under different names, but always at the age of 28. Callum was different. He refused to leave the valley. He stayed close to the house. He spoke in dreams, and as a child he would wake standing over the 13th coffin in the barn, a place he had never been taken. As he aged, he didn't speak much, but when he did, it unsettled even grown men. At 10, he told the sheriff's wife the exact date she would die. At 14, he buried a box in the orchard and said, "I put the pieces back where they started." By 28, he hadn't aged, not visibly. Locals said he looked 16, pale, black-eyed, unreadable. He wore no watch, owned no phone, and never went into town. But on his birthday, he climbed the hill. They found his boots and coat at the base of the cedar tree, the one carved with 13 names. No body, no note, just a ring of scorched earth and a strange hum that vibrated in the air until the next sunrise. The Murphy line ended that night, but something else began. In the following months, 5 babies were born to different families across the county, all boys, all born premature but strangely healthy. Each one at one point was found standing in their crib, staring toward the same hill, same day, same hour, as if called, and in each of their left palms, a faint scar, a line shaped like the letter M. The town of Eldon's Hollow tried to forget. It sealed away the Murphy farmhouse, declared it condemned. The orchard was razed. The cedar tree, the one etched with 13 names, was cut down and burned. But the stump wouldn't smolder. It hissed and bled black sap. The fire chief resigned the next day, muttering about roots that wouldn't die. The 5 boys born after Callum's disappearance grew under a cloud of suspicion. Each family claimed their child was different, smarter, calmer, colder. They rarely cried, rarely laughed, but they shared dreams, identical ones, recounted to stunned parents in eerily similar words. "We're in the barn, the others are calling, the 13th door is opening." One boy, Henry Creel, began drawing symbols he had never been taught, marks found in the Murphy family Bible, locked away in the town archive. Another, Eli Carver, vanished for 3 hours and returned clutching a small black feather. He said it came from Callum's shoulder. Worse yet, the boys were all aging abnormally. By the time they turned 5, they looked 8. By 8, they were silent. But their eyes spoke. People avoided them in the streets. Dogs whimpered near them. Mirrors warped their reflections. They were the continuation, or the infection. And then came the year of 13 fires. 13 barns from 13 counties burned in a single night. No lightning, no storms, just a wind that swept in at 3:13 a.m. and vanished at dawn. At the center of each barn's ash pile, a single object untouched by flame, a child's shoe, a photograph of a boy, or a lock of hair. At each site, the same thing was found etched into stone or wood. He returns by the blood, 13 through 1. The town panicked, churches reopened, old preachers were dragged out of retirement, there were whispers of binding circles, exorcisms, and on descendants of watchers. But it was too late. Because by the boy's 13th birthday, one by one, they began to disappear. Not kidnapped, not murdered, but all vanished. Clothes folded, beds undisturbed, windows locked from the inside, only a scent left behind, cedar smoke and iron. Some believe the Murphy curse was never a curse at all, but a summoning, one that took 13 lives to open something ancient. And now, with these new 5, it was almost ready to step through. The Murphy farmhouse no longer stands. But if you walk the old road off Hollow Pike, the one locals avoid, you'll find the land still breathes. The grass refuses to grow in straight lines. Birds never perch, and if you listen long enough, the sound beneath the wind isn't rustling, it's breathing. They say the curse ended, that the 13 sons, from Enoch to the final boy, fulfilled the bargain made in shadows long before the Murphy name was even spoken. But those who truly know the tale know this: the bargain wasn't for freedom, it was for entry. In 1887, a traveler, a professor from Massachusetts, visited Eldon's Hollow to study regional folklore. He never returned, but months later, his journal arrived by post at Miskatonic University, mailed with no return address. The final pages were soaked in cedar resin. The ink bled, but the last legible line read, "There is no Murphy family, only 13 vessels, and something that wears their skin." Across the country, reports emerged. Boys of no known parentage, adopted under strange circumstances, appearing in towns with old names, names linked to vanished settlements, cursed mines, drowned churches. All of them share one trait: they vanish at 28, just like the Murphys. In a remote Kentucky town, a pastor found his adopted son muttering in a dead language, one heard only in the dreams of a former Murphy mother. In Montana, a boy disappeared from a locked room, but his voice was recorded on a nanny cam whispering, 13 gates open, he is crossing. In Washington state, 13 boys born on the same day now reside in a silent facility. No speech, no emotion, just drawings of an open barn and a figure made of shadows and stars. And what of the original farmhouse? Rumor says a new house stands on the same soil, but no blueprints exist, no postal records, and those who've tried to visit Nain find the turnoff. Just a dense, humming forest. GPS glitches. Compass needles spin. But late at night, locals report a faint red glow on the horizon. Some say it's swamp gas. Others say it's the 13th fire, never truly extinguished. Because maybe the Murphys weren't cursed. Maybe they were chosen. And maybe what came through them wasn't punishment, but preparation. Because now, it's not just the sons who vanish, it's entire towns. Silently,